Open it. I'm curious to see if they have anything left on the shelf. No power like everywhere else.
Lyubov has been working in the shop for 20 years.
Вот, и очень хочется, чтобы это все быстрее кончилось. Но это было просто ужасно, то, что с нами случилось, мы не понимаем.
Can I ask you to do one thing? Will you just look right into this camera and tell our audience, Americans, and not just Americans, what it's like to be here?
Страшно нам жить в таких условиях. Очень страшно каждую минуту. Боимся прилетов, боимся за родных и близких, боимся не дожить до победы. Мы хотим дожить до победы.
The reason they're so worried is that Russian troops are advancing all around them and may try and take over their village next. Tom?
Richard Engel again with the human toll of this war. Richard, thank you for that. In 60 seconds, the president now expected to make a controversial trip to Saudi Arabia. This as gas prices soar to yet another record as OPEC and allies will increase production. But will it help? That story next.
Age-related macular degeneration may lead to severe vision loss. And if you're taking a multivitamin alone, you may be missing a critical
steroid, topical or injection.
Good news because it is dry in western South Dakota. Our highs in the low 70s. Take a quick peek at next week. It looks like next week it's going to be cooler than normal all week. We're looking at highs generally the upper 60s to low 70s, which is below average. And we'll have at least a chance of rain each day. Not really looking at severe weather. It doesn't look like there's going to be a ton of energy coming in. But at least a chance of rain each day. It's not going to rain each day. It's a little, with this westerly flow that we have, a little difficult to time out exactly when the little bursts of energy will come through. But there's at least a chance of rain each day next week with those cooler temperatures. Temperatures right now still in the mid-70s across the area. A bit of a northwest breeze. It's dying down. Satellite picture, see these specks. They're actually dissipating even now. So that's just the broken clouds we have. Western South Dakota clouds a little bit thicker, and we'll keep those clouds tonight. Here's a look at the futurecast. Nothing for today. Tomorrow we'll have a partly sunny day here in the east. Here comes some showers and thunderstorms western South Dakota. Then tomorrow night, see that area of yellow with showers, maybe some thunder showers along south of I-90. That's tomorrow night, 10 o'clock. This is Saturday morning. Some showers, they'll go away. Then Saturday, we'll have another chance of some showers in the west. They'll dissipate. By Sunday morning, here's what could be some showers during the day on Sunday in eastern Carolina. So, yeah, it's going to be that way for the next several days. Total rainfall, fairly limited. Quarter to a half inch, kind of north of I-90. Areas south of I-90, half to 3/4 of an inch. The good news is the better area of rain is going to be in western South Dakota. Here's your forecast for tonight. Our skies will be clear, low to the mid-40s during the day tomorrow. Sun in the morning, partly sunny in the afternoon.
All into the afternoon, not too much going on. There's going to be high pressure sitting right on top of us, at least the first part of the day, and then we'll have a few clouds moving in as that high pressure system moves away, along with a chance for a couple of showers here and there late in the day. Tonight, though, again, the sky clearing off. Here's tomorrow morning at 7. Nice, clear to partly cloudy. Temperatures for the most.
Make them feel safe. So one way to do it is to have routines and have like an environment where they feel safe and that they can talk about whatever it is that they're, might be going through.
So very useful tips there. Dr. Martha Livingston, CEO and Clinical Director of the San Antonio Counseling and Behavioral Center. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you.
Recent history suggests new gun reforms are more likely to emerge out of state houses rather than Washington, D.C. Over the coming days, we'll explore some of the proposed and recently enacted policy experiments across the states. William Brangham begins our coverage with an examination of extreme risk prevention orders, more commonly known as red flag laws. The measures, which are in use in 19 states, allow guns to be temporarily seized if family or law enforcement believes someone is a risk to themselves or to others.
On New Year's Eve 4 years ago, a sheriff's deputy was shot and killed in a suburb south of Denver by a man suffering serious mental distress. That killing prompted a Republican state representative to introduce a red flag law in the Colorado legislature. But that lawmaker then came under attack from conservative gun rights group. His law didn't pass, and the representative lost his next election. His name is Cole Wist. He's now a lawyer in private practice, and he joins me now from Colorado. Cole, great to have you on the NewsHour. Just playing off this example that motivated you to introduce this bill, can you help us understand how your law would have worked? Who contacts the authorities? Who judges this? Who makes the decision that it's okay that someone should have their guns taken?
Well, good evening, William. It's great to be with you. I'll talk about how this would have played out under the 2018 bill that I introduced. And that is that the family members or law enforcement could apply for an extreme risk protection order. And they would swear out an affidavit, submit that to a judge. And if the judge agreed that it met a threshold determination that the individual posed a risk to himself or herself or others, then the judge could issue a temporary order that would allow law enforcement to remove firearms from that individual. Under our bill in 2018, there was a 3-day period that the court would then hear whether or not that order would be made permanent. And we had a very high level of due process that was required to be met by the movement or the person that was seeking the protective order. And under our bill, the person seeking to remove those firearms would have had to have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that that individual posed a risk to themselves or others, and that removal of weapons from that person's possession was necessary to accomplish those means. There then would have been an opportunity, if the order was granted, 6 months later to then consider whether or not that order should be renewed or dissolved, and the person could receive their firearms back. In the version of the bill that passed in 2019, those periods were extended quite a bit. In fact, doubled to 364 days if an ERPO is entered against someone.
So you were a Republican legislator, a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and yet this conservative gun rights group came after you. They called you a gun grabber. They called you Cole the Mole. And they passed out flyers attacking you. How did that sit with you, having this kind of blowback?
Well, it strikes me that we miss the mark when we talk about mass shootings or incidents like the one that motivated me to sponsor this legislation. And that is, these are matters of public safety. And in all other cases, and if you look at cases of domestic terrorism and the mass shootings that we've seen in the United States over just the last week, these are domestic terrorist incidents. And when we look at domestic terrorism, our government has not been hesitant to make sure that we're doing everything that we can in a proactive fashion to make sure that we protect public safety. But when you enter the word gun in this conversation, it freezes the parties. And in my particular circumstance, I guess if you could identify a sin that I committed as a legislator, and that is having the willingness to talk to folks on the other side across the political spectrum about solutions that we can put into place to protect constitutional rights, to make the burden of proof very, very high for someone seeking to deprive someone of the possession of a weapon, and yet at the same time recognizing that there is an important public safety concern here that's not being addressed by our current laws. And that's the reason I was motivated to introduce this piece of legislation.
Given your experience as someone who tried to reach across
How can you see me squinting?
sensible approach.
And I paid $60 more just to go fishing this weekend.
Did you catch anything good?
Oh, I did. I caught a bunch of fish.
Until the next time. And it seems as though they're coming closer and closer together. So there's a metastatic effect going on where we don't even seem to be able to make it a week without some type of a shooting.
A day. Yeah. We did a mass shooting segment yesterday that was interrupted by my having to report on another mass shooting, stacked on top of each other. It is more than one a day at this point. Veronique De La Rosa, thank you so much, and God bless you. Thank you for sharing what is a very, very painful story with all of us. And Dr. Amy Goldberg, thank you. Really appreciate both of you. And still ahead, stay with us as we await the start of President Biden's national address. You can see it there. The door will open. He will speak on gun violence. Lawrence O'Donnell and Michael Beschloss will join me next. and the lead-in. Be back.
Going to give a big speech on guns. And later, he's going to go back to Delaware, where he's already spent almost 200 days so far. He's been spending more time away from the White House than all of the recent past presidents, Trump, Obama, Bush. But he can't read minds, and he can't turn on a switch. But he sure can point his finger. Maybe he should use that finger to turn on that switch. Monica.
It's perfect when you're home or on the go with
sleep per night. Sleep Number takes care of the science.
Weather headlines the past several months, but recent storms and rainfall from that is really starting to change that picture, and now new forecasts for additional rain will continue to have an impact. A quick look at the 14-day precipitation map clearly shows the blue streaks of above normal precipitation during one of the wettest times of the year on average. The rain has been much too heavy across parts of the Northeast. 7 inches fell in Aberdeen during the month of May. Last week's drought monitor already demonstrated some of the big contrasts across KELO, with ongoing severe drought west of Pierre and waterlogged soils in the Northeast.
Will probably be up to members of his own party, specifically in the very center, Joe Manchin in particular, about whether or not anything happens about what he talks about. Here's the senator from West Virginia.
Eliminating the filibuster would be the easy way out. It wasn't meant to be easy. I cannot support such a perilous course for this nation when elected leaders are sent to Washington to unite our country, not to divide our country, and putting politics and party aside is what we're supposed to do. It's time that we do the hard work to forge the difficult compromises that can stand the test of time.
So does the urge and the call to finally do something after Uvalde and Buffalo and now Tulsa break through the hard partisan lines we have? George Will with us, senior News Nation contributor, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. Good to see you, sir. What do we make of the fact that this is 7:30 in the evening Eastern, something President Biden really does not do?
Yes, it's a kind of portentous announcement. And there's an old saying, Leland, that if you get the girl up on her tiptoes, you better kiss her. The analogy here with the president is when you tell the country, stop what you're doing, gather around, pay attention, I've got something important to say, you'd better have something important to say. Now, that's very difficult after the last week when everybody has said everything they know, and a good bit more in many cases, about the subject of gun control.
I'm thinking about one of the things the president said a couple of days ago about sort of restricting the types of weapons, which is highly unpopular with the right and very popular with the left. Here's him talking about cannons, for example.
Second Amendment's not absolute. When it was passed, you couldn't own a cannon. You couldn't own certain kinds of weapons. It's just always been limitations.
You could own a cannon, in fact. You could have a warship with cannons back when the Second Amendment was written. Yeah. How much of the rhetorical flourishes are going to have to be given up? How much of the nods to assault weapons bans and magazine bans and all of the far left's wish list must be given up for even any chance at compromise?
Well, first of all, you have to clean house in the speech writing shop. That he just said about the cannon, aside from being false, is the kind of over-the-top rhetoric that got him in trouble in Atlanta, where he said, if you don't agree with me about Georgia's voting laws, you are Jefferson Davis, Bull Connor, and George Wallace. Lower the temperature, turn down the thermostat on the rhetoric, and understand that the American people are pretty much in the middle on this. Convince the American people that you have a law that will address mass shootings, and they'll be for it. The problem is you can't make, it's very difficult to make that argument.
Let me just ask you, is it even...
And Republicans, and they say that the president has not been directly involved in those yet, but clearly the president speaking to the nation, he's also speaking to those lawmakers as well, Aaron.
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much.
as those doors open. Of course, we're awaiting the president. With me now, John Avlon, our senior political analyst, and Anthony Barksdale, former acting Baltimore police commissioner. So, John, the president pushed to do this, and he pushed to do it in prime time. This is obviously rare for him to do so, right? Demanding the television time in a very specific way at this time, at this second. So the bar is high.
The bar is high, but this is an issue he cares deeply about. The third speech on guns in 3 weeks, he clearly thinks this is something that his administration will be judged on, and he thinks there might be a chance, just maybe, that Congress can get something done. He has a record of passing gun legislation, as he is fond of pointing out, back to the 1990s. A much tougher bar now, given how polarized Congress is, but some possibility. So the question is, what constructive role can the president play in pushing this forward today?
And Commissioner Barksdale, let's talk about that, right? I mean, the nation is on edge about gun violence. People are angry on both sides of the political spectrum, but completely divided over what to do about it. You have some in Congress already saying, you know, raising the age to 21 is unconstitutional, right? You have people who are starting on some of the most basic reforms saying they're non-starters. Is there anything President Biden can say tonight that would make a difference?
I just want the president to stay on the course that he set to do something about this. That 21 years of age argument, think about this, Aaron. 2 incidents that involved 18-year-olds. Look how many we've lost because of that. So it's worth the fight. Hopefully it's not a fight that, you know, that can't be figured out. But we need new laws. We need action, and we need it now.
And John, you know, in the context of John Cornyn from Texas, any restrictions, not going to go there, right? Jim Jordan's the one who made the comment about unconstitutionality of 21. Are there enough Republicans to move forward on some common sense? And when I say common sense, when the White House says it, it somehow comes off as political. I want to use it in the sense of this is something that the vast majority of Americans support, and also that the vast majority of members of the NRA support.
Well, yes, and that's what's so critical. We have supermajorities of the American people supporting things that fall under common sense gun safety laws, preventing people from mental illness from getting their hands on weapons, closing the gun show loophole, for example. These are common sense. Here's the President of the United States.
Yep, he's walking out here in these final seconds, and obviously so much at stake for him in this address, because it's one thing to speak and get the airtime, and what matters is, are people going to listen? Is he actually going to be able to move the needle in Congress? So here is President Biden speaking on gun
Memorial
control.
Day this past Monday, Jill and I visited Arlington National Cemetery. As we entered those hallowed grounds, we saw rows and rows of crosses among the rows of headstones with other emblems of belief, honoring those who paid the ultimate price on battlefields around the world. The day before, we visited Uvalde, Texas. In front of Robb Elementary School, we stood before 21 crosses for 19 third and fourth graders and 2 teachers. On each cross, a name, and nearby, a photo of each victim that Jill and I reached out to touch. Innocent victims murdered in the classroom that have been turned into a killing field. Standing there in that small town, like so many other communities across America, I couldn't help but think there are too many other schools, too many other everyday places that have become killing fields, battlefields here in America. We stood at such a place just 12 days before, across from a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, memorializing 10 fellow Americans, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, gone forever. At both places, we spent hours with hundreds of family members who were broken, whose lives will never be the same. They had one message for all of us: do something. Just do something. For God's sake, do something. After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland, nothing has been done. This time that can't be true. This time we must actually do something. The issue we face is one of conscience and common sense. For so many of you at home, I want to be very clear. This is not about taking away anyone's guns. It's not about vilifying gun owners. In fact, we believe we should be treating responsible gun owners as an example of how every gun owner should behave. I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute. It was Justice Scalia who wrote, and I quote, "Like most rights, the rights granted by the Second Amendment are not unlimited." Not unlimited. It never has been. There have always been limitations on what weapons you can own in America. For example, machine guns have been federally regulated for nearly 90 years, and this is still a free country. This isn't about taking away anyone's rights. It's about protecting children. It's about protecting families. It's about protecting whole communities. It's about protecting our freedoms to go to school, to a grocery store, to a church, without being shot and killed. According to new control and prevention, guns are the #1 killer of children in the United States of America. The #1 killer. More than car accidents, more than cancer. Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined. Think about that. More kids than on-duty cops killed by guns. More kids than soldiers killed by guns. For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough, enough? I know that we can't prevent every tragedy, but here's what I believe we have to do. Here's what the overwhelming majority of American people believe we must do. Here's what the families in Buffalo and Uvalde in Texas told us we must do. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks. Enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. Address the mental health crisis, deepening the trauma of gun violence and as a consequence of that violence. These are rational, common sense measures. Here's what it all means. It all means this. We should reinstate the assault weapons ban on high-capacity magazines that we passed in 1994 with bipartisan support in Congress and the support of law enforcement. 9 categories of semi-automatic weapons were included in that ban, like AK-47s and AR-15s. And in the 10 years it was law, mass shootings went down. But after Republicans let the law expire in 2004, and those weapons were allowed to be sold again, mass shootings tripled. Those are the facts. A few years ago, the family of the inventor of the AR-15 said he would have been horrified to know that its design was being used to slaughter children and other innocent lives instead of being used as a military weapon on the battlefields as it was designed. That's what it was designed for. Enough. Enough. We should limit how many rounds a weapon can hold. Why in God's name should an ordinary citizen be able to purchase an assault weapon that holds 30-round magazines that let mass shooters fire hundreds of bullets in a matter of minutes? The damage was so devastating in Uvalde, parents had to do DNA swabs to identify the remains of their children. 9- and 10-year-old children. Enough. We should expand background checks to keep guns out of the hands of felons, fugitives, and those under restraining orders. Stronger background checks are something that the vast majority of Americans, including the majority of gun owners, agree on. I also believe we should have safe storage laws and personal liability for not locking up your gun. The shooter in Sandy Hook came from a home full of guns. They were too easy to access. That's how he got the weapons. The weapon he used to kill his mother and then murdered 26 people, including 20 first graders. If you own a weapon, you have a responsibility to secure it. Every responsible gun owner agrees to make sure no one else can have access to it, to lock it up, to have trigger locks. And if you don't, and something bad happens, you should be held responsible. We should also have national red flag laws so that a parent, a teacher, a counselor can flag for a court that a child, a student, a patient is exhibiting violent tendencies, threatening classmates, or experiencing suicidal thoughts.
For the weekend and early next week, and
to themselves or to others. 19 states in the District of Columbia have red flag laws. The Delaware law is named after my son, Attorney General Beau Biden. Fort Hood, Texas, 2009, 13 dead and more than 30 injured. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, 2018, 17 dead, 17 injured. In both places, countless others suffering with invisible wounds. Red flag laws could have stopped both these shooters. In Uvalde, the shooter was 17 when he asked his sister to buy him an assault weapon. Knowing he'd be denied because he was too young to purchase one himself, she refused. But as soon as he turned 18, he purchased 2 assault weapons for himself. Because in Texas, you can be 18 years old and buy an assault weapon even though you can't buy a pistol in Texas until you're 21. If we can't ban assault weapons, as we should, we must at least raise the age to be able to purchase one to 21. Look, I know some folks will say 18-year-olds can serve in the military and fire those weapons. But that's with training and supervision by the best trained experts in the world. Don't tell me raising the age won't make a difference. Enough. We should repeal the liability shield that often protects gun manufacturers from being sued for the death and destruction caused by their weapons. They're the only industry in this country that has that kind of immunity. Imagine if the tobacco industry had been immune from being sued, where we'd be today. The gun industry's special protections are outrageous. It must end. And let there be no mistake about the psychological trauma that gun violence leaves behind. Imagine being that little girl, that brave little girl in Uvalde, who smeared blood off her murdered friend's body onto her own face to lie still among the corpses in her classroom and pretend she was dead in order to stay alive. Imagine what it'd be like for her to walk down the hallway of any school again. Imagine what it's like for children who experience this kind of trauma every day in school, in the streets, in communities all across America. Imagine what it's like for so many parents to hug their children goodbye in the morning, not sure whether they'll come back home. Unfortunately, too many people don't have to imagine that at all. Even before the pandemic, my unity agenda that I laid out in the State of the Union address this year. We must provide more school counselors, more school nurses, more mental health services for students and for teachers, more people volunteering as mentors to help young people succeed, more privacy protection and resources to keep kids safe from the harms of social media. This unity agenda won't fully heal the wounded souls, but it will help. It matters. I just told you what I'd do. The question now is, what will the Congress do? The House of Representatives already passed key measures we need. Expanding background checks to cover nearly all gun sales, including at gun shows and online sales. Getting rid of the loophole that allows a gun sale to go through after 3 business days, even if the background check has not been completed. And the House is planning even more action next week. Safe storage requirements, the banning of high-capacity magazines, raising the age to buy an assault weapon to 21, federal red flag law, codifying my ban on ghost guns that don't have serial numbers and can't be traced, and tougher laws to prevent gun trafficking and straw purchases. This time, we have to take the time to do something. And this time, it's time for the Senate to do something. But as we know, in order to get anything done in the Senate, we need a minimum of 10 Republican senators. I support the bipartisan efforts that include a small group of Democrats and Republican senators trying to find a way. But my God, the fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable. We can't fail the American people again. Since Uvalde, just over a week ago, there have been 20 other mass shootings in America, each with 4 or more people killed or injured. More people killed or injured, including yesterday at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A shooter deliberately targeted a surgeon using an assault weapon he bought just a few hours before his rampage that left a surgeon, another doctor, a receptionist, and a patient dead and many more injured. That doesn't count the carnage we see every single day. It doesn't make the headlines. I've been in this fight for a long time. I know how hard it is, but I'll never give up. And if Congress fails, I believe this time a majority of the American people won't give up either. I believe the majority of you will act to turn your outrage into making this issue central to your vote. Enough, enough, enough. Over the next 17 days, the families in Uvalde will continue burying their dead. It will take that long in part because it's a town where everyone knows everyone. And day by day, they will honor each one they lost. Jill and I met with the owner and staff of the funeral home as being strong to take care of their own. And the people of Uvalde mourn as they do over the next 17 days. What will we be doing as a nation? Who was murdered and whose husband died of a heart attack 2 days later, leaving behind 4 beautiful orphaned children, all now orphaned. The sister asked us, what could she say? What could she tell her nieces and nephews? It's the most heartbreaking moments that I can remember. All I could think to say was, I told her to hold them tight. Hold them tight. After visiting the school, we attended Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church with Father Eddie. In the pews, families and friends held each other tightly. As Archbishop Gustavo spoke, he asked the children in attendance to come up on the altar and sit in the altar with him as he spoke. There wasn't enough room, so Mom and her young son sat next to Jill and me in the first pew. And as we left the church, a grandmother who had just lost her granddaughter passed me a handwritten letter. It read, quote, erase the invisible line that is dividing our nation. Come up with a solution and fix what's broken and make the changes that are necessary to prevent this from happening again. End of quote. My fellow Americans, enough. Enough. It's time for each of us to do our part. It's time to act for the children we've lost, for the children we can save, for the nation we love. Let's hear the call and the cry. Let's meet the moment. Let us finally do something. It's the families who are hurting. God bless you all. From a hymn based on the 91st Psalm sung in my church. May he raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn. Make you to shine like the sun and hold you in the palm of his hand. That's my prayer for all of you. God bless you.
And there you have it, the President of the United States saying, for God's sake, how much carnage are we willing to take? It is time to act. Let's finally do something. The President calling to reinstate the assault weapons ban from 1994 and to ban high-capacity magazines. He also said if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age from 18 years old to 21 years old. Why is that significant? Well, as we've reported, 6 of the 9 last mass shootings have involved men under the age of 21 years old. These are young men using high-capacity assault rifles to kill innocent children and others. The president also calling for universal background checks, national red flag laws to end gun manufacturers' special protections. And he said this is not an effort about taking away anyone's guns. He said this is about common sense gun reform. Let's bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe.
Very, very specific. This was not a general motivate people. This was a to-do list.
It was, and it's a big change over the past week in the White House response from the president and the people who work for him in the executive branch. Aaron.
And finally, in peer book.
David, Joe Biden knows this fight well, and he knows what an uphill battle it is. He knows well the political reality that he is facing. And, you know, it strikes me listening to this that what Biden said then 10 years ago, after 20 children were massacred and he was put in charge by President Obama to lead this charge for gun reforms, what he said then is very similar, almost exactly the same to what he said tonight. Is this time it? Is this time going to be enough? This time 19 children killed. Is this going to finally spur Washington to act? And he knows that, unfortunately, in the past, it simply hasn't. It doesn't seem that anything has been enough. And, you know, I asked the president just yesterday.
If someone in that shooter's family, his sister, his mother, his grandmother, who we know was shot, had appealed to authorities, Texas doesn't have this law, but in that example, that would have been the kind of moment. The opposition to these, as the president noted, and you did as well, Jeff, is that the staunchest gun rights groups in the country think that this is an inappropriate use of allowing a family member or even a court, unelected court, as they like to put it, that it supersedes a constitutional right and that there's no due process really built into the system and that it's unacceptable. We have seen in the past that those groups have pressured. Last year, when there was a red flag law being debated with regards to service members in the military, those groups pressured House Republicans, and they backed off of that. Representative Dan Crenshaw, who's representing
to thread that needle tonight. Obviously, that clip you just played stood out to me in watching the speech, that he was clearly trying to appeal to gun owners that, you know, we're not trying to vilify you, we're not trying to take your guns. Of course, then he lists a list of, you know, priorities, things that he thinks need to change, different gun control measures that he would support. These are measures that, you know, are being considered in the House, but even when you look at what is being considered in the bipartisan group of senators who are looking into this issue, these are definitely beyond the few gun control measures that tend to have more bipartisan support.
The political spectrum in these last few weeks, no one likes to see what's happening. His anecdote that Carl mentioned at the end, talking about the grandmother who slipped a note to him saying, please erase these divides in our country. That's a wonderful sentiment. It's the type of sentiment actually that helped Joe Biden get elected, but it's undercut dramatically by his attempts at shaming Republicans in that speech and making this at times into something of a political voting electoral call for action. Those things don't really coexist very well, and I think he did not help the chances of something actually happening in the Senate very much with his speech tonight, unsurprisingly.
Molly, do you agree with that? Do you think he hurt his chances with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats getting a gun deal together?
He showed that this was for him a partisan political approach. Do something is not a serious policy, but the actual policies that he listed are extremely troubling. I think it's comforting for simple-minded people to think that restricting the natural right to keep and bear arms would solve all of our problems, that destroying the Constitution would solve our problems. That is not true, and we have a natural right of self-defense and to guard against tyranny in the Second Amendment. This is something that makes us American. And Joe Biden showed that he does not respect the Constitution. He does not support.
At least in those days, the vice president of the NRA said, we're not going to be so stupid and so insane as to stand in the way of control of a weapon that killed the president of the United States. We have not been living in such a crazy world for 60 years, but we have in recent years. The president has to remind people, we all have a right to life. This is an issue of law and order. Last I heard, those are conservative principles. Let him tell that to those 10 senators.
Right, and I mean, Lawrence, it is not as if there are not already regulations on firearms. There's a reason why we no longer see the situation that we saw in places like Chicago in the 1930s, where people were gunning each other down in the mob with machine guns. Machine guns are heavily regulated by the federal government under the tax code, but you have to have a certain specific kind of license to own one. It is so difficult that a person who, I don't know, got treatment that they didn't like at the doctor's office couldn't just go to the store, buy a machine gun, and come back and kill people with that. But you can with an AR-15. The federal government has a role to play here, and it already does it with other kinds of firearms. Is that an argument that could work on Republicans who make it sound like there are no regulations? Because there are.
Well, Joy, you made it sound like there's, or I should say, Senator Murphy made it sound like there's no argument that can work, because what Senator Murphy is suggesting is that Republican senators need to see that there is absolutely no political price to be paid by them, by voting for any of this legislation. And their definition of that would be, we must not lose a single vote in our re-election campaigns. Now, let's just think for a second about the utter moral bankruptcy of that. So you're saying that you will take no action to save the lives of school children at their desks in America if it costs you anything in your re-election. I don't care if it costs you your entire political career. You're supposed to cast that vote. And these people suggesting that it's reasonable for us to oppose this because it might hurt us in our re-elections, they are simply using a world of moral bankruptcy that has descended on Washington as a standard operating procedure.
I think that other states can look at that. I think it's better served at the state level. That's an area for common ground. So should some reasonable protections at schools. That should be on the table at least. Was not mentioned, as you pointed out, at all from the president tonight. It might seem like small ball to some people, but that's what's realistic. And I think if the president had wanted to actually move the process forward, he would have said very little, if nothing at all tonight, except for, I'm hoping that the bipartisan group in the Senate gets their work done, and I look forward to seeing what they offer. That would be constructive. I understand the desire to emote. We're all emotional. But the question is, are we going to really have enough and try to get something done? And if that's the president's true aim, true intention, a big speech tonight, while politically tempting, I don't think is the ticket.
But he's worried about his base, Molly. He's losing his base. They're angry with him. He hasn't gotten anything really done legislatively. So he needs to go hard after the AR. Isn't that what this is about?
Well, the base is the only group that has been served well by the Biden administration since it began. All of his policies seem to be appealing to them. Unfortunately, there's not much disagreement in the Democratic caucus itself. They all support what he's working on. But I do want to say, I think too often people accept the framing put forth by corporate media and other Democrats that this issue that we're dealing with is a gun issue. In the same way that we just talked about, if a car is used to commit violence, you don't blame the car. We really do have a problem in this country. We are raising children who seem to have lost their moral compass or never had it to begin with. And we need to be talking about things that actually deal with that, whether it's fatherless homes, drug use, mental illness, and other things. And a serious nation would talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, Hillary Clinton said herself, it takes a village, right, Molly? Thank you guys very much. Let's bring in Katie.
Follow his path. I ain't perfect, but I try to follow.
Crisis since or a breakdown in the law or an evolution in how people purchase guns and what kind of guns were available, and talked about updating laws to deal with that based on the fact that we have done things like this before. I thought those were the effective and productive parts of his speech. I thought that the least effective part was his complaints about Republicans and how it's unconscionable they wouldn't even debate many pieces of that. Look, it may well be, and I'm sure Democrats were happy to hear that, but when you're trying to create an atmosphere for Republicans to take risky votes, and because of where their base is on this, and George Will talked about this earlier this evening, it's a very determinative issue for how Republicans vote. You want to foster an atmosphere where they're going to feel comfortable taking votes and being able to explain it back home. And I think that's where the president should focus his efforts. To the extent that he talked about supporting bipartisan efforts in the Senate to do just that, I think that was helpful for his cause.
You make a great point, as did George Will before this, that people who vote on the issue of guns vote Republican typically. That if it's a determinative issue, it is to protect gun rights, not to further restrict them. Interestingly enough, are you satisfied with the nation's laws or policies on guns? Only 41% are very or somewhat satisfied, and that is roughly the president's approval number as well. David Drucker, Washington Examiner, Steph Kite of Axios, thank you both. Great being with you. Marnie Hughes here for Prime, just in the next couple of minutes.
On the other side,
the central bank, the Federal Reserve.
Days into the calendar year, and there have already been 234 mass shootings. Here they are on a map. 234. More mass shootings than days of the year, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which defines mass shootings as shootings involving at least 4 people who were shot. That's a pace of 1.5 mass shootings a day, 3 every 2 days, upwards of 10 every week. And just minutes ago, after 2 weeks that have seen 3 especially deadly acts of gun violence in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and with Congress debating what, if anything, to do, President Biden spoke to the country. He called for restoration of the ban on assault weapons, or failing that, raising the age for purchasing such weapons, also banning high-capacity magazines, instituting tighter red flag laws, and the repeal of a liability shield protecting gun manufacturers from prosecution or being sued following mass shootings.
Just like mass shootings, we've got the grocery store in Buffalo, New York, an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, and then last night, a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tonight, the president is calling on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban, strengthen background checks, and also raise the age limit to purchase these weapons to 21. Take a listen.
Imagine being that little girl, that brave little girl in Uvalde, who smeared blood off her murdered friend's body on her own face to lie still among the corpses in her classroom and pretend she was dead in order to stay alive. Imagine what it'd be like for her to walk down the hallway of any school again. Imagine what it's like for children who experience this kind of trauma every day in school, in the streets, in communities all across America.
That question is never answered by the president. The point of this, of course, is to disarm people who did not vote for Joe Biden. And that is why, simultaneous with this effort to recategorize the guns in your closet as felonies, Democrats have been failing to prosecute gun crimes in our cities, where most of the crime is. And if you're at all confused about whether the effort here is selective, if this is enforcement only at certain people, you'll notice the president never mentioned the apparent federal gun felony his own son committed when he lied on a federal background form when he bought a handgun. Didn't mention that. Justice Department has completely ignored it. Instead,
is just designed to appeal to Democratic primary voters. The bill won't make our schools safer. It will hamper the rights of law-abiding citizens, and it will do nothing to stop mass shootings.
Stop saying nothing in this legislation would change anything. That is a lie. That is not true. It will save lives. If you don't think that's worth doing, say that. Have the courage to say none of that matters. You think it's important that there should be as many guns available to as many Americans as possible. You want no restrictions. Be honest about it.
Democrats control
the major cities that have the worst murder rates. That's right. Your ideas have been shown to get people killed.
Do not tell me that the answer to this is to put even more guns on the streets or to militarize our schools.
Perhaps the most unsettling was a performance from Republican Congressman Greg Steube of Florida, who took the opportunity just days after multiple mass shootings to present his personal gun collection, kind of like an excited child eager to show off his toy trains.
Right here in front of me, I have a SIG Sauer P226. Comes with a 21-round magazine. Here's a SIG Sauer 320. Here's a gun I carry every single day. This is a XL SIG Sauer P365.
I hope the gun is not loaded.
I'm at my house. I can do whatever I want with my guns.
I can do whatever I want with my guns. Truly an inspiring message of responsible gun ownership from the congressman. Now, the House is all but certain to pass its proposals as early as next week, but any gun safety legislation faces an uphill battle in the Senate. Right now, a bipartisan group of senators is attempting to cobble together any bill that can get 10 Republican votes to overcome a filibuster. But of course, we've been here before too many times with Democrats desperately trying to find common ground with the Republican Party that's simply unwilling to compromise at all on guns.
Which would be less than what would be lawful under this bill if this bill were to become law. It doesn't fit. So this gun would be banned.
I hope the gun is not loaded.
I'm at my house. I can do whatever I want with my guns.
So you heard a voice in the background. Greg Steube obviously knows his way around firearms. That was his gun. But off camera, you heard Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas interrupting Greg Steube to tell him how to handle a firearm in his own home. So is Sheila Jackson Lee a gun instructor now? What does she know about firearms?
Right, this is the filibuster that we heard about. It takes 60 of 100 senators. There are 50 Democrats now, leaving 10 Republicans that have to go along to break a filibuster on new gun restrictions to pass Congress. And the Senate has always been the problem. I remember 10 years ago, I was standing outside the Senate chamber in the wake of Sandy Hook when everyone thought there was going to be a renewal of the assault weapons ban at an absolute minimum. And then Senator Dianne Feinstein, as it happens, I was standing with a small clutch of reporters. She told us on her way into a meeting it wasn't going to happen. It was breaking news. No one could believe it, especially after the ghastly, unspeakable events that happened at Sandy Hook. So there is still some pessimism and well-earned pessimism in Washington about whether any of this can happen. But the president does need the Senate to go along. You know, the Senate is institutionally biased towards rural states. I mean, that's just a fact of the matter that is not going to change. That has been true for the history of the Republic. And it's not as much of a Republican-Democrat issue as everything else is, but it is a rural-urban issue as well. So the Senate is always the problem. There are talks underway now, a bipartisan group of senators, Chris Murphy from Connecticut, where Sandy Hook took place, John Cornyn from Texas, home of Uvalde, of course, where that massacre, that horrible shooting took place in a school there. So 2 senators from states that have seen unthinkable shootings in elementary schools leading these talks. Mitch McConnell has tasked, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate has tasked John Cornyn with doing this. The trouble is that normally the playbook is to let the furor die down, and then sooner or later the drive for these restrictions goes away. The political impetus, the political capital is simply not there. The trouble with that strategy this time is that people keep walking into grocery stores, into elementary schools, into hospitals, and committing these mass atrocities. And so there does seem to be, even though there are no guarantees there's going to be a breakthrough in terms of an agreement on any kind of new gun restrictions, there does seem to be a little bit more momentum than there would ordinarily be when we're talking about this kind of legislation. We're talking about this
issues such as this, and the legal lever is one that you can pull. And when you think back to big tobacco, that's exactly what we're doing from the manufacturing perspective. It's not going to stop manufacturing. It's not going to stop people from purchasing guns. But if they can be held accountable for their sales and marketing messages and the way that they target young adults and shift, that will be a major change as well. And that is one of the additional solutions that's on the table, and something that I'm personally very excited about.
Nicole Hockley, I appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
More now on what the president said tonight and what, if any, impact it may have on the debate in Congress and the country. Joining us now is CNN Chief Political Analyst Gloria Borger, CNN Senior Political Commentator and former Obama Senior Advisor David Axelrod. Also, 2 more CNN political commentators from the left and the right, former Obama Special Advisor Van Jones and former Trump campaign strategist David Urban. Gloria, I mean, you hear Nicole Hockley sounds optimistic about the possibility for things actually getting done.
If she can be optimistic, why shouldn't everyone be optimistic? It seems to me that she knows more than any of us what's at stake here. And she is so involved in this. And we all tend to be cynical about this because there's good reason to be cynical about this, which is the president proposing a renewal of the assault weapons ban. We all know that's not going to happen. But what he was doing tonight, I believe, was talking to the American people, a majority of whom agree with him on all these issues, agree with him on red flag laws, agree with him on raising the age to buy an assault weapon to 21, agree with him on safe storage laws, and on and on and on. He knows a lot of this isn't going to get done, but I think the fact, and I agree with her, I think the fact that they're all meeting and they're not giving up is something that we shouldn't say, oh, well, forget about it. It may end up there, but the American people, I think, to whom the president was speaking, agree with him when he says, enough, enough, enough. Do it. And, you know, I think that's a message that every parent who is listening tonight can say, yeah, enough.
David Axelrod, the White House made a strategic decision to stay out of negotiations on guns between Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill. Is that speech a sign the strategy isn't working and the president needs to engage, or is it just the president trying to add momentum?
Well, it's interesting, Anderson. The last time we were all together was the night of this horrific massacre in Texas, and the president spoke, and he was very much not talking about what needed to be done. He didn't specify action. I think partly because there has been such a dismal record of getting things done, and so he has waited to see how things come together, and they are coming together by all accounts. There is a possibility of something getting done, and I don't think he wanted to be a spectator in that process. I think he wanted to play a leadership role here, and so they decided now is the time to step forward. As Gloria said, he laid out what he wants to see, but knows that some more modest steps may be in the offing, but any progress would be historic after 27 years of inaction. And he was involved in the, you know, he was the one who was the author of the assault weapons ban. He was involved in serious action to deal with gun violence in the past. So, you know, this is something very personal to him.
Van Jones, did you hear what you wanted to hear from the president? Well, I'm wondering what reaction you're hearing or seeing from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Well, first of all, I think people should be encouraged. Be encouraged. The boards are starting to creak under the weight of the pain of this country, so many funerals, so many dead bodies, so many dead children. The boards are starting to creak, and I think people should be encouraged. I think the president did a fantastic job. He went from being the consoler-in-chief to really being the educator-in-chief. He walked through the common sense arguments that are there, and he did it in a way that any regular person would say, this at least makes sense. This is not somebody who's trying to take everybody's guns away. And he even shows he's listening to some of the criticism on the 18 to 21 by saying, yes, our 18-year-olds in the military, they can have those weapons because they're supervised and trained by the best in the world. That's not the same as somebody going and grabbing a gun as soon as they turn 18 and shooting up someplace. I thought he did a masterful job. It was a beautiful job. His heart was there. It wasn't just heart, it was smart. He put forth the argument, I think, in a very, very profound way. And I think people should be encouraged. The boards are starting to creak.
David Urban, if boards are creaking, is that a good thing? Are there enough Republicans who think that's a good thing?
Well, listen, Nicole's message was really, I think, spot on. Lean into the optimism and focus on what's possible, is what she said, is what I heard her say. And I think that's exactly correct. And for the president to come out and call for an assault weapons ban when he knows it's just not going to happen, I think is a little disingenuous. I think that from listening to Nicole speak, and she, as you indicated, she's obviously knows, or maybe Gloria said this, she obviously knows far more than any of us because she's probably intimately involved in these negotiations. That there are things that can really occur here which will be substantive, far fall short of an assault weapons ban, will really make a difference in perhaps raising the age to 18. Protection
21.
orders like there are in Florida, like from 18 to 21. Yeah. Red flag laws, protection orders like there are here in Florida, which make a difference in saving lives. Those are going to fall far short of what a lot of progressives, a lot of people want, but they'll still make a difference. And Nicole's message of leaning forward into the optimism and focusing on what's realistic, I think, is a message that everyone should hear and take away from this, and not simply demagogue on the issue.
But David Urban, do you think there are 10 Republicans in the Senate who are willing to, are interested in moving?
I don't know. I would guess no, there aren't, right? I guess that these are probably, that you're going to hear a lot of people saying that, red flag laws should be done at the state level, like that was done in Florida and other states across America, that they'll say that state legislatures are capable of doing this and it should be handled at the state level. But I think there is a cause for optimism. There is a real dialogue taking place among really substantive members of the Senate, Lindsey Graham and John Cornyn and others, with Chris Murphy, who's been a leader on this issue. And it is a cause for optimism. They may not get everything that's on the table, but something I think would still be a victory.
We're going to pick up this conversation. We're going to take a short break. We'll talk more in detail about what Congress could do, would do, might do, or won't do, whether there's reason, as Nicole Hockley said, for optimism, but also what the Democratic senator prepared, in his words, for failure in a House hearing on gun legislation nearly going off the rails. We'll have more on that. Later, also, we're now learning about the shooting yesterday that took 4 lives in Tulsa. We'll be right back.
At Booking.com, finding perfect.
Deborah, interestingly, the president did say this is not about taking away guns or vilifying responsible gun owners. I think, interestingly, there was not a lot of pushback from folks in Florida and certainly from the NRA when Florida passed some of the laws that it did after the Parkland shooting. Where do you think the biggest resistance is in getting some of these laws passed?
I think we're making something political that shouldn't be political. As we've said a number of times, this is an epidemic. It's a health epidemic, and we're Americans. We should. The fact that we're killing our future, that our babies are dying, that these are the people that are supposed to grow up and make our nation better, and we're just sitting back and letting them continue to be slaughtered, should be an American issue. So I think at some point we have to stop worrying about who's Republican and who's Democratic. It's not, to me, never has been a political issue. No one stops anybody and asks them what their political affiliation is before they shoot them. So that we have to move past that and not draw those hard lines in the sand that say, because I'm a Republican or a Democrat, this is what I believe in. I believe we all believe in America. And we all believe that we should live in a safe society where our children can go to school and not have to worry about dying there, and our teachers and our staff in schools, in our churches, in our grocery stores. So at some point, it has to stop being political.
For both of you, when we heard what had happened in Uvalde, it's heartbreaking and tragic and horrific for all of us to learn the details of this latest shooting involving children. Again, last night in Tulsa. For the two of you who have lost the people that you love the most, to see this continue to keep happening, describe for me the feelings of the open wound that creates for you both. Veronica, let's start with you on that.
It's something I battle with on a daily basis. It's just has opened up a chasm in the center of my life that nothing can really fill. It's an irreversible loss, the magnitude of which is almost beyond words to explain or convey. And if we want to believe that we are a life-affirming society, that we value the sanctity of life, then we must stop being a culture of death, because that is exactly what's happening. And the more these happen, the more inured a certain segment of the population becomes, and it just becomes an abstract when in fact it impacts lives irreversibly. in such horrifying and far-reaching ways. So it's just a loss that I will never recover from.
No, a nightmare neither of you will ever wake up from. Deborah, your husband, Chris, lost his life trying to disarm the gunman inside his school. How difficult is it for you to continue to have this conversation?
It's like pulling off a scab on a wound continually over and over again, you know, and as we've said, thoughts and prayers, they're nice and we appreciate them. But at this point, we need empathy and outrage. We need people to understand that it isn't just another one. They're not just another set of numbers for mass shooting victims. That was a life. Christopher and I were together for 32 years. Every adult decision I ever made was with him in the center of it. And, you know, how do you move past that? How do my special needs son struggles every day with how come other people died if his dad did because he ran in there to stop them? And how did that not stop it? And then he sees it on TV and he goes back into a tailspin about why does this, you know, daddy was in there trying to stop this. Why does it keep happening? I don't even know how to explain that to him.
If there's ever a time for us to put our differences aside, it is now, when so many of our loved ones are dying. In honor of Chris and also Noah, before I let you both go, the president made a point tonight to talk about mental health and the crisis facing our youth across the country. I would love both of your thoughts on how we best reach our kids as mothers, as educators in this arena of gun violence. How do we reach our kids, and what do you think needs to be done on the federal level, at the state level, and around the kitchen table to handle this?
I guess I'll go first. I am an educator. I was a teacher for 32 years and recently elected on the school board. And what I think we need to look at is the access to social media and the fact that social media is now a platform for people to learn about mass shootings, to share their thoughts and their plans about mass shootings, and to be able to carry them out that way. So social media has turned into, I think, our biggest enemy in a lot of those arenas because we can't monitor it. And I think that we need to look at how there's a better way to do that. But we also, we do threat assessments in Florida. So then students are given mental health services, but then no one follows through to make sure that they're seeking those services and actually getting what's provided. So in Florida, we just passed a law where every district will have to have a mental health coordinator to ensure that students and their families, they go to the families and also provide them and let them know what services are available. Because, you know, it isn't just the student 9 times out of 10. There's a bigger picture there where everybody needs to get the services to be able to move forward. So I would say those are the 2 main things, to make sure that they're actually providing the services that are required, and how do we better deal with social media and not allow it to be a platform for mass murderers to learn and to advertise what they want to do.
Deborah and Veronique, I want to thank you both for being with us tonight. This is a difficult issue, but it's an important one, and one that, as I said just moments ago, has hit your families that you never recover from. In honor of Chris and also Noah, there is no better way to honor them than to put aside our differences, have these important conversations. I hope you both will come back, because I want to keep talking to you about this as we watch what happens, hopefully, in the days, weeks, and months to come. Thank you both for your time, and I'm sorry for your losses.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, a bit more about the shooting in Tulsa, what we're learning tonight.
It was a much more robust package that addressed all those things. And you know, and I heard the president speak about his walk.
I'm going to say, well, I'm going to stop.
America's choice in home care.
Charlie themselves harmed. And of course, in other contexts, Republicans appreciate the power of small impediments. I am definitely not the first person to point out how fond they are of inducing friction and hassle in the context of women's reproductive rights. They have tried to come up with as many impediments as possible to secure an abortion. From waiting periods to mandatory ultrasounds to little mandatory monologues the governor has to give you, the doctor has to give you, to closing clinics. And also, I'm not the first person to point this out, notice how they never say, well, if a woman really intends to have an abortion, she'll do it anyway. Laws can't stop her. Also, we have implemented gun safety laws before. Several states have red flag laws on the books that allow the government to temporarily take firearms from a person who may be dangerous to themselves or others. Several states also require permits to buy or carry guns, and background checks and waiting periods before purchasing them. And in years past, some Republicans have even supported these measures, including Ronald Reagan, who shockingly came out in favor of the Brady Bill in 1991.
Surprise, Ronald Reagan endorses a federal gun control bill.
He looked and sounded like the Ronald Reagan of old, but what he said was far from it. This darling of the gun lobby endorsing a gun control bill.
And I'm going to say it in clear, unmistakable language. I support the Brady Bill, and I urge the Congress to enact it.
When the Brady Bill was enacted 2 years later, waiting periods for the purpose of carrying out background checks actually became federal law for a time. And it had a real impact.
The Brady Bill will take effect 90 days from today. It will require a 5-day waiting period to purchase a handgun. During that time, authorities will conduct a background check on the buyer for any criminal record or mental illness. Critics claim that will do little to stop violent crime. Brady's wife, Sarah, has devoted the last 7 years to getting the bill passed.
It will begin to make a difference. It will begin to save lives.
In 4 states that already have waiting periods to buy handguns, that seems to be true. 47,000 sales have been blocked after background checks.
According to the Brady campaign, background checks have made a big difference in the nearly 30 years since the law went into effect, preventing approximately 4 million prohibited gun transactions. And data show that states that require background checks on all handgun sales have seen less than half as many mass shooting incidents as states without that expanded requirement, as well as 35% fewer gun deaths per capita. Again, even though the scale of the gun violence problem has gotten almost out of control, there are small, marginal things we need to start doing to add friction, to add impediments, to stop this from happening over and over. We have to start moving the problem in the right direction as opposed to the wrong one, which is the direction it's going now. We'll talk about the measures debated in Congress today next.
Like pulsing electric. The DC Swamp PAC is responsible for this advertising.
Dusty Johnson voted with the Democrats for red flag gun confiscation, stripping military service members of their gun rights. Dusty voted 3 times to kill President Trump's wall. As a veteran and a state representative, Taffy Howard has spent her career fighting for America. Taffy defeated red flag gun confiscation, led the fight for election integrity, is working to grow jobs and support business, and is standing up for agriculture against the Biden administration. On June 7th, vote for Taffy Howard, the Republican for Congress.
I'm Taffy Howard, and I approve this message.
So it is official, the creepy porn lawyer will not be the Democratic nominee for president. Sorry, CNN, not one of your better predictions. He's got other things to do. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey. I appreciate it. Coming up, new details on the shootings that spurred the president's speech in Tulsa while the gunman went to a doctor's office who he was targeting. And in Uvalde, Texas, our Shimon Prokupecz on the ground, keeping him honest, still looking for answers why law enforcement didn't respond, exactly what went on. They're still trying to figure out, at least in the public, to tell the public and the families what actually happened. We'll be right back.
Can we get a report on Friday?
Sheldon, an oral treatment is right.
And your parents should all be ashamed.
36-year-old man after a TAVR. He had a heart rate of 150s to 160s. So I guess we kind of answered that, where it could, 10 years or more, perhaps, but perhaps then the valve could be replaced.
Right, exactly. So I think TAVR is very good at fixing aortic valve stenosis. It's, that valve may only last for 10 years, but we can put another valve inside that valve. So it's not, I think after you treat the aortic valve stenosis, the prognosis should be pretty close to what it would have been otherwise. It's what else caused the aortic valve stenosis. Right. Have we fixed those issues? That probably affects how long he's going to live more than anything else at
And
that
the thing
point.
with TAVR came, it was done in high-risk patients who were like 85, 90 and stuff like that. So that's what the data initially started. Now we are kind of broadening up to intermediate to lower risk. But initially when we had, so I think, so those were like older patients to start with who were high surgical risks. They were not candidate for open heart surgery. So TAVR were initially for those. So yeah, and we're learning more as we go, but yeah.
Sure. Going back to this triplet, they are triplet and the only one of the three that has to take high blood pressure medications.
Oh.
Why is that? And is there anything I can do besides watch my diet?
Oh boy. That is a hard
That
question.
is a hard
question. I'm like, have to say, what are the other two?
Well,
other
you know,
brothers?
I mean, in general.
Yeah.
So, what if someone has risk factors for high blood pressure, what would be some of the risk factors for high blood pressure?
Again, I think the main thing is a couple of risk factors are maybe sleep apnea, undiagnosed sleep apnea. That's what I see that's just missed, and that can make an impact on blood pressure. I think diet in general too. You know, salt is the biggest culprit over here because they kind of retain water, and that increases your blood pressure. And then again, a bit of exercise. So those were the ones that sedentary lifestyle that kind of lead to high blood pressure, obesity, and now on rarer side are some hormonal problems, or there is some issues with your kidneys. Those cause your blood pressure to rise. So these are the big ones.
Yeah, it is amazing those twin studies where they can isolate the genetic reason, but then sometimes, you know, we don't know the details.
Nurture,
right.
yeah.
And everybody different. And for example, if two people have the same genes, everybody expresses the gene differently. So there is a lot of variation, as you said. You know, so.
Yeah.
Wealth gap, but if you look at Ghanaians and Nigerians, people who have black skins, who live in this country, there's little or no wealth gap. Now, I wonder why that is. If you go and you study those families, you'll find that a bachelor's degree is the baseline. That's where you start.
That's
and
right.
there's a tremendous emphasis on the family and family structure and faith. Those things make a big difference. And if you take traditional black American families who have those same values, there's very little wealth gap there too. So I wonder if perhaps we're looking at the wrong things. We're trying to blame somebody else. If you believe you're a victim, you are a victim. And, you know, you think things like critical race theory, the 1619 Project, all of those things that try to get black people to feel like they're victims. They try to get white people to feel guilty. You know, the advantage of making white people feel guilty is then you can defund the police, you can put dangerous criminals out, you can leave the southern border unguarded, and nobody will say anything. They'll just hang their head and hope you don't call them a nasty name. These are not things that should be going on.
That's what we know about the attack and the weapon that connects this mass shooting to so many others.
The murders in Tulsa followed a sequence of events that began 2 weeks ago, according to Tulsa police. On May 19th, the killer underwent back surgery.
The performing physician was Dr. Preston Phillips.
The patient was released from the hospital on May 24th. 5 days after that, he
purchased a semi-automatic handgun, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol.
2 days later, the gunman saw Dr. Phillips for more treatment. The next day, on June 1st, he called the doctor's office complaining about his back pain. That same day, he bought a semi-automatic rifle from a gun store.
That semi-automatic rifle was an AR-15 style rifle.
And then, later that afternoon, 4:53 p.m., Tulsa police received a 911 call about a shooter on the campus of St. Francis Hospital. Several more calls were then received, with the information that shots were fired in the Natalie Medical Building near the main hospital. Only 3 minutes later, at 4:56 p.m., the first Tulsa police officers entered the building. Officers got to the second floor where the shots were heard within 2 minutes and began yelling, identifying themselves.
As officers were calling out Tulsa police and advancing towards a suspect location, they heard a gunshot. We believe that was the final gunshot, with the suspect taking his own life. The gunshot was at 4:58 p.m., approximately 39 seconds after the first officers entered the building.
It's a multi-floor facility, hundreds of rooms, hundreds of people. It was complete chaos as people ran out, and then we did a methodical floor-by-floor search, looking at every room. People were hiding. We were able to get them out safely.
Law enforcement found all the victims quickly. In addition to Dr. Phillips, who according to a letter found on the gunman was the killer's target, Dr. Stephanie Huson was also killed, as was office receptionist Amanda Glenn, and a patient, William Love, who was critically hurt and died shortly after. A woman was found under a desk at the foot of the dead gunman. She hid and survived. Dr. Phillips was remembered as a great person and physician who went on annual medical missions.
Dr. Phillips was the consummate gentleman. He is a man that we should all strive to emulate.
We asked the police chief if he felt the shooting rampage would have continued without the rapid response.
We are trained to go in there and stop the threat, regardless of what may happen to us, and that's what our officers did. We have no reason to believe that he was going to stop.
And Gary joins us now. Are police investigating anyone else who may have had advanced knowledge of this attack?
Well, Anderson police tell us that last night they received a call from the killer's wife, and she told them that she received a call from her husband when he was on this medical campus, either shortly before he carried out the shootings or during the shootings, and told her what he was up to. Police say the information they have right now indicates that she did not know about this in advance, but you can be sure, Anderson, they will continue talking to the wife.
Gary Tuckman, appreciate it. Thank you. Joined now by someone who knew several of those who were killed. Dr. Ryan Parker is an associate medical director at the St. Francis Health System. Dr. Parker, thank you for being with us. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. I know you work closely with Dr. Phillips, and you just had lunch with him on Tuesday. What was he like?
Oh, goodness. Like Dr. Robertson said in the press conference this morning, he was the consummate physician. It was interesting. I'm the associate CMO here, and I was introducing him to our new chief medical officer, and I was telling her a little bit about Preston, and I told him the thing that I most respect about him is that he treats everybody the same. It doesn't matter if you are an environmental services housekeeper, all the way up to the CEO and other physicians. He truly just appreciated and respected people's humanity. I saw him one time in our little coffee shop, and oftentimes employees would come to him for surgery. He was a very good surgeon. And one of the employees in the coffee shop had just recently had surgery, and he called her out by name, and she just smiled because she felt so important, because he remembered her and was reaching out to her, but that was just him. It wasn't unique.
You know, we all see this on television. We've seen this, for years now happening in cities and in elementary schools and churches and supermarkets and, now a medical building. To actually live through it, to know a person who was there having lunch with you one day and then several days later is killed. I mean, how do you deal with this?
I don't have any words. I don't know how we deal with it. You watch other people go through this. I've seen, other cities go through this on the news. In fact, I moved here in 2018. I was living in Dallas when we had another mass shooting in downtown Dallas, and the same emotions flood over you. It's how could it be me? Oh my gosh, I just had lunch with him yesterday. I can't believe this. It's surreal. You don't live through it in a way that doesn't affect you. You are never the same after something happens. And so I don't have a good answer about living through it. I think we're trying to take one moment at a time.
Yeah. I mean, we're not just really talking about Dr. Phillips. There's Dr. Stephanie Huson, there's the receptionist, Amanda Glenn, right. Patient William Love were also killed. You actually apologized to Mr. Love's family earlier today, I understand.
I did. One of the images that will never leave my brain, and it's interesting because I've been privileged to walk through the 9/11 memorial in New York, and one of the things as an emergency provider is there's a haunting picture of all these emergency physicians dressed up waiting for victims of 9/11, and they just couldn't do anything. They wanted to help, and there was no one to help. And when we first got news that there was an active shooter, I ran down to the ER from my administrative office, and our team was preparing. We didn't know what we were going to get. We were just preparing for the worst. And we had a full trauma hallway of just nurses, techs, our trauma team, our emergency physician team. People came from ICUs upstairs just to be there. We were all ready. We wanted to use our skills, and we couldn't. And so I did apologize. We wanted him, and we couldn't.
I mean, that image, just thinking about you all there, I mean, so, when people were evacuating the hospital, you're saying the staff who could do something stayed on site to do whatever they could, just waiting to do whatever they could.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, other people, right. We were locked down, but people were turning around and coming back, and you want to help. I used the term this morning, that's our job, to help and heal. And we can't help ourselves. That's what we wanted to do in that moment, and then there was just no one to help.
Yeah. And the healing takes a long time. Dr. Ryan Park, I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. And again, I'm so sorry for your loss and all those who are suffering tonight, who are grieving. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Just I had more questions about the timeline and search for answers about what really happened, what exactly went wrong in the police response to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School. You heard the chief of police there in Tulsa describing a reaction that seems textbook, exactly how quickly it should be done. CNN's Shimon Prokupecz has done more digging today. He joins us next.
About once weekly Trulicity.
Inflation and to shut up and have an abortion. How did someone like that, who's not from the state of California, who's one of the craziest people in the whole United States Congress, get elected in Orange County, California? Do you have any idea?
Well, that was a tough year for Republicans. 2018, she got elected, and she didn't have a well-funded opponent last time, and she didn't have a record the first time she ran. But this time, she has a record, and she has a record of things that support her ideology more than how her ideology impacts the everyday person in Orange County. For example, on drilling. She doesn't want any more drilling, and yet she blames the high price of gas on corporations. And then, of course, she sends a letter to Joe Biden saying government spending doesn't cause inflation. And then she advocates for $20 trillion. Tucker, she's voted for $20 trillion in spending, and then she goes shopping for a pound of bacon and wonders why it's $10 a pound. She's just out of touch with this district, and now she has a record. I'll have the funding to point that record out.
She's just the embodiment of lifestyle liberalism that doesn't work at all, it turns out. Scott Baugh, good luck.
So you can have more success tomorrow.
Glasses? Buy one pair, get one free at Vision Works. How can you see me?
Red flag laws could have stopped both these shooters. In Uvalde, the shooter was 17 when he asked his sister to buy him an assault weapon. Knowing he'd be denied because he was too young to purchase one himself, she refused. But as soon as he turned 18, he purchased 2 assault weapons for himself. Because in Texas, you can be 18 years old and buy an assault weapon, even though you can't buy a pistol in Texas until you're 21.
We want to continue our coverage now on medical malpractice laws across the country. Right now, caps on damages in some states severely limit which victims of medical malpractice make it to the courtroom. I sat down with 3 people recently who have very different stories of loss and heartache to tell, but who share a common goal for justice.
When it comes to human life, accountability is non-negotiable.
The justice system exists for everyone. You rely on these doctors with your life.
Sabrina Davis from Florida, Richard Waldher from Wisconsin, and Michael Whittier from Maine have one thing in common. All claim they have been impacted by medical malpractice.
You feel as though you have been denied some measure of justice. Is that where you are?
Yes.
How frustrating is that at this point?
Extremely painful.
Sabrina lost her father, Keith, Richard, his daughter, Tracy, and Michael is fighting late-stage cancer. The three of them are facing different battles in different states to change the laws, making it difficult for them to access the courtroom.
I'm up against deep pockets. They don't want this law to change.
It was just 2 years ago that Sabrina's life changed forever when she dropped her father off at the ER after he complained of knee pain.
We trusted them, and we educated this resident on my father's history of blood clots and that he's taking a blood thinner.
Despite his medical history, Keith Davis was moved to rehab without receiving an ultrasound to check for blood clots.
My dad and I talked, and 19 minutes after we spoke, he had no pulse and he was not breathing. I contacted his primary doctor and I said, "What happened? My dad was there for knee pain and he's dead. I don't understand."
Suspicious of the circumstances surrounding her father's death, Sabrina immediately paid to have a private autopsy done.
They pulled out a 9-inch long blood clot from my father's chest, 100% preventable.
Armed with the autopsy report, Sabrina began looking for an attorney to take her case.
I called and called several lawyers,
but was shocked to learn she didn't really have one because her father was retired, unmarried, and had no dependents.
How difficult was that news for you?
I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it.
Florida law prevents the families of unmarried adults with no dependents from recovering non-economic damages like loss of companionship in wrongful death cases involving medical negligence. This loophole is referred to by its opponents as Florida's free kill law. Earlier this year,
but, you know, had he not appointed her, he might have appointed somebody equally bad.
Coming from him or anyone surrounding him, Anderson.
It's stunning to me just listening to the police in Tulsa who, on the day of the shooting, gave out very detailed information about when the calls came in, what happened. It's really stunning when you look at that press conference and then you look at a week later how little we still know about what happened in Uvalde. I know you tried to get answers from the county district attorney today.
Right, and that's the thing, Anderson, having covered these, sadly, so much at this point, you know, there's a process here, there's a procedure, and law enforcement officials here are not following that. And so as part of our hunt really for answers, we were told that officials here are no longer allowed to publicly speak about this case. They're not allowed to answer our questions because the DA's office is now part of this investigation, and the DA here has told them not to talk to us. She said refer them to us. So we went to her office today to ask her questions. There's a lot of information that needs to come out. Madam? And so you can see there, Anderson, she was escorted out by the sheriff's deputy there into her car and then just simply left, did not want to answer any questions, said she had no comment at one point when we spoke to her inside the building. But then again, this is part of the way they're operating now, refusing to answer any of our questions.
So, I mean, local authorities had at one point said to expect a report tomorrow from the Texas Rangers. Is that still happening?
No, we believe that's now not happening. The local senator here, the Texas state senator here, he's been pushing for answers. He's been out here every day with us. Roland Gutierrez is his name. He was hoping for some kind of information to come out tomorrow from the DPS. He was asking for just some basic information about officers that were in the building, how many and where they were. Well, he was told today, according to him, just sometime tonight, he was told by DPS, by the head of the DPS, the man who is in part running this investigation, that he was told by that DA that he cannot release any of the information that the Texas state senator is asking for.
The irony thing is, you know, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz was, you know, made sure to stand right behind Texas Governor Greg Abbott at that press conference where they were giving out facts and information, and, you know, he was going to say just the facts, and a lot of that stuff just wasn't true. That, you know, we now know what he said, and he seemed to have been duped by it as well. It's amazing that he hasn't sort of, I guess he doesn't want to get anywhere near this publicly until there's a report out, but it's amazing that he hasn't come out and given new information, or that nobody is. Shimon, appreciate all your efforts, Shimon Prokupez. It is not easy. Up next, a CNN exclusive on what some allies of the former president are saying now about their pleas for him to step in and stop the violence on Capitol Hill on January 6th. Also, what we've learned about who the House committee investigating the attacks intends to call as witnesses when their public hearings are scheduled to start next week.
At Booking.com,
They started doing some testing and found out that I had prostate cancer. I was really confused by the fact that I had prostate cancer because that's the first I had heard of it. And
despite the fact that you had gone in for checkups and you've been tested.
Exactly, yeah. They found out that it was advanced enough that it got into my bladder and some of my lymph nodes as well.
Facing mounting medical bills, Michael searched for a lawyer to take his case.
Basically, they said there was nothing they could do for me. State of Maine does not have a discovery rule.
In Maine, the clock starts ticking on the statute of limitations the moment alleged malpractice takes place, regardless of when it's discovered by the victim, meaning that in the event of a cancer diagnosis, the clock might run out for a legal case before someone even knows they're sick.
How did you react when you found that out?
Well, I was angry for one, because it had 3 years to progress.
And had they caught the cancer earlier, how much better of a position would you have been in?
Every doctor that I've spoken to so far said it would be pretty much a routine surgery. I wouldn't have the side effects of the cancer progressing into my bladder and lymph nodes.
Michael is in remission, but still haunted by the circumstances of his diagnosis.
What is your prognosis?
I've got another year of hormone therapy to go, which is it's pretty brutal.
What part is so hard?
I've got sons and I've got grandchildren and a beautiful wife, and just the not being told part.
Sabrina, Richard, and Michael are united in one other aspect: a steadfast resolve to fight for change.
The loss, the pain, the grief, somebody can't put in words. There's no dollar amount that'll make up for that.
It's not about the money. It's not. It's about fairness.
We need help. We have a fight that we did not sign up for. Put the money aside, put the politics aside, and truly look inside, look in their heart, and think about how it could be you, it could be your child, it could be your loved one.
And because this is such an important and also complicated issue, we have created a place for you to learn more about medical malpractice laws, including a way for you to find out if your doctor has a disciplinary record. You can go to newsnationnow.com to see our continuing coverage, and also our team of digital reporters have provided lots of extra material that will help you better understand medical malpractice laws and how they differ state to state. After the Uvalde school shooting, many Americans are once again urging lawmakers to take action to stop the senseless violence. In Ohio, they are in the process of passing a bill that supporters say will do just that by allowing school employees to carry a gun. But it is not without controversy. Tomorrow night, right here on Prime, we're going to be looking at the states that are already doing that and who supports it and who doesn't. We'll be right back in a moment with something to smile about.
If you could only eat one thing the rest of your life.
This is. And just to get right to the heart of it, do you believe that had it been legal for you to have your own firearm, that you would have been able to prevent the murder of your husband?
I'll never really know. I was denied a chance. I was stalked and defenseless. But I tell people, look, gun-free zones are a magnet for evil. I truly believe these people, whether it is a mass public shooter or a stalker, anyone with evil intent, a gun-free zone screams. These people are absolutely helpless. They're defenseless, they're vulnerable, and what better place to attack?
Wait, so you're saying that murderers aren't worried about violating gun-free zone laws when they go commit murder?
No.
Our most popular battery is even.
If you read some of these manifestos that these sickos leave behind, you'll see that they plan this stuff months, years in advance sometimes. And they choose gun-free zones because they want to get a high body bag count. And what better place than a gun-free zone where no one can stop them immediately?
If you wanted to make the country safer, why would you disarm law-abiding people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're pleading with Mark Meadows to get Trump to stop the attack and send the rioters home. There are 150 messages, texts that day. Here are just a few. From Congressman Jeff Duncan, 3:04 p.m., POTUS needs to calm this. You can read it on the screen down. From former Trump HHS Secretary Tom Price at 3:13 p.m., POTUS should go on the air and defuse this. Extremely important. From North Carolina lobbyist Tom Kors at 3:42 p.m., please have POTUS call this off at the Capitol. Urge rioters to disperse. I pray to you. And then, as you mentioned, Anderson, I went back and called 17 months later a dozen of these people and asked them what they were thinking about when they reached out to Meadows. Each one said that they believed Trump had the responsibility to speak out immediately, that he failed to do that, and if he had, the attack would have stopped. So this is from a Meadows associate. 2 hours is just inexcusable when the safety of the federal government is in question. You have the duty immediately to speak out, and Trump was derelict in that duty. And from a very senior Republican, I think he knew he could stop it, which is why he remained silent. That is a key point, Anderson. Wow. And just finally, one more from a former senior Trump administration official. He failed at being president that day. So it speaks to exactly, Anderson, the case the committee is going to make next week, that Trump's inaction on January 6th was a dereliction of duty, and that they believe he was obstructing Congress and the peaceful transfer of power, Anderson.
Former Congressman Riggleman, who also said the evidence he had seen was, quote, horrific, and that, quote, you can see almost QAnon and other conspiracy theories had inundated the Republican Party all the way up to the top levels. Does that match what you saw reviewing the text?
It does. When you look at the text messages as a whole, we have reviewed all 2,319 that Meadows handed over to the committee. There are Republican members of Congress, GOP supporters, big donors, who are just pushing wild conspiracy theories. It's troubling, to say the least, that they are sending these messages to Mark Meadows. But I would say perhaps the biggest concern is that Meadows doesn't push back, even though he knows these outlandish theories are false, even though he knows from then Attorney General Bill Barr that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud. Several sources on the committee have told me that when they look at these text messages, they believe it shows that Meadows was Trump's enabler-in-chief, Anderson.
You've also learned new details about who the committee intends to call when they begin public hearings scheduled for 1 week from today. Who could the committee lead with, and what does it say about the strategy?
So first of all, I want to say they really have not given out very much information. They are holding it close to the chest. We do expect to hear from many folks on Team Pence, but we've been told not to expect Mike Pence himself. We're hearing that Pence's former general counsel, Greg Jacob, is likely to testify, that former federal judge Michael Luttig, who played, as you remember, a key role in putting out those tweets that knocked down his former law clerk John Eastman's outlandish theory to try to get Pence to help Trump overturn the election. The committee would like him to testify. And finally, we're told the committee wants to hear from former Pence Chief of Staff Mark Short, who was with Pence on January 6th and was a first-hand witness to many of the events, Anderson.
Jimmy Gangel, thank you. Appreciate it. Great. We'll be right back.
Peace of mind. Such a big, beautiful idea. strict. So they have to really sort of toe this line. And I think that that's why you may or may not see the names like Rudy Giuliani, who did testify, but would they have a different sort of outward presentation publicly? But yes, I think that they're trying to, pull in people who had a behind-the-scenes view, who can offer and shed light into what really happened and help really create this timeline that we saw coming from the White House around January 6th.
I think early on when Steve Bannon was served with a subpoena that he refused to comply with, I think there was a real open question about whether there would be a kind of massive resistance from people to this inquiry and to the subpoenas. And that has not shaken out. I mean, interestingly, it's kind of gone the way that like a Bob Woodward book is, where he just goes to everyone as like, if you don't talk to me, that person is going to talk ass about you. So you should probably be able to get ahead of that. And then everyone talks about Woodward. So you've got, like, for instance, you've got Mastriano, who is now the nominee in Pennsylvania, who we know is investigated by the FBI, or talked to the FBI about his renting buses for that January 6th rally. He's cooperating with the January 6th committee. And then you've got Barr coming out. I mean, there really aren't that many people they didn't get to talk to.
No, I've actually heard from some of my sources who are close to the Trump world that there is actually frustration that there wasn't sort of a more cohesive legal plan in place about how they were going to be going about with the committee. And that's why you're seeing Navarro taking shots at the president's son-in-law. But in terms of, some of the big blockbuster names that they're trying to get, the ones that we're really waiting to see, at least I am, are the House Republicans that they're trying to get to come talk to them about their conversations with Donald Trump.
We've also got new texts, Mark Meadows. Again, I think a preview of what we're going to be seeing, which is the barrage of people pleading with him to get Trump to call off the dogs in January 6th, and really kind of visceral and immediate, and the sort of thing I imagine we're going to see at the hearings.
Yeah, I think you're going to be hearing people saying what they were relaying to some of the top people who were closest to Donald Trump. I know that there were a lot of people messaging Mark Meadows and saying, you need to tell him to stand down, whether it was, conservative personalities, whether it was reporters, whether it was staffers and other people who knew him well. We know that there were text messages that were coming from all different angles saying, we're in this building and we need help.
Yeah,
or this is really bad for the White House and you need to step in.
Even from his Donald Trump's own son, who apparently did not have daddy's number at that point, Olivia Beavers. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
That is all in on this Thursday night. MSNBC Prime starts now with Mehdi Hassan. Good evening, Mehdi.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you very much. Imagine not having daddy's phone number.
Sad.
But thank you.
Sad story.
It's just something to think about tonight. Thanks to you all at home for joining us this hour. It was February the 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day. On that day, a 19-year-old mass shooter armed with an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and multiple magazines of ammunition entered Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and murdered 17 people. That shooting sparked a nationwide youth-led movement for new gun safety legislation. But a year later, little had been done at the federal level to curb gun violence. By Valentine's Day 2019, then President Donald Trump was trying to push the nation's attention back to his favorite pet issue, building a wall to stop immigrants. At the time, Trump was threatening to declare a national emergency in order to try to build his precious border wall without congressional approval. And it was that threat from Trump which prompted this counter-threat from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
If the president can declare an emergency on something that he has created as an emergency, an illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people. You want to talk about a national emergency? Let's talk about today, the one-year anniversary of another manifestation of the epidemic of gun violence in America. That's a national emergency. Why don't you declare that emergency, Mr. President? I wish you would.
Why don't you declare that emergency, Mr. President? If Trump declares a national emergency at the border, she said, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people. The very next day, Donald Trump did declare a national emergency at the U.S. southern border. And the very next year, the nation did elect a president with very different values. Tonight, that president issued an address to call for action on gun violence in America. He did not declare a national emergency. But here is some of what he did say.
After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland. Nothing has been done. This time that can't be true. This time we must actually do something. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Enough. But my God, the fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable. Meet the moment. Let us finally do something.
Now, we like to use Joe's favorite language. For God's sakes, Joe, do something. For God's sakes, Joe, I have a question. Why didn't you and Barack Obama do something in 8 years to stop the violence in the city of Chicago, Obama's hometown? Why not, Joe? And for God's sake, Joe, why did you never one time, not one time, as VP for 8 years, mention a single child's name killed in Obama's hometown when you were vice president? For God's sakes, why? You never lifted a finger, Joe. Why? You know, save us the lectures, because you've been missing in action for all of these years. Now, this divisive speech tonight was nothing more than a political stunt, pretty predictable. Likewise, the Democratic Party and the new gun control bill, that too is a political stunt in an election year. It will not pass the Senate. That didn't stop one far-left member of Congress from openly fantasizing about his party's wildest dreams. Take a look.
Enough of your thoughts and prayers. Enough. Enough. You will not stop us from advancing the Protecting Our Kids Act today. You will not stop us from passing it in the House next week, and you will not stop us there. If the filibuster obstructs us, we will abolish it. If the Supreme Court objects, we will expand it, and we will not rest until we have taken weapons of war out of circulation in our communities. Each and every day, we will do whatever it takes to end gun violence, whatever it takes.
Oh, that means full authoritarianism. That sounds great. In case you haven't noticed, Democrats, they don't like our system of checks and balances, our Constitution, something called the Bill of Rights. They just want one-party rule in perpetuity forever and ever and ever. And that's why they want the court packing. They want D.C. statehood. They want to end the filibuster, and they don't want voter ID laws. The president himself wants to disarm lawful Americans because he thinks the Second Amendment is about hunting deer and not an absolute right. Joe Biden, well, has to be one of the dumbest people in D.C., and that is saying a lot. So dumb that Joe can't even figure out why his poll numbers are cratering. Right now, he's underwater. Look at this, in 40 out of 50 states. A new Reuters poll has him at a whopping 36% approval rating. According to NBC News, he is absolutely mystified, totally bewildered about these plummeting numbers. He thinks it might be a messaging problem, and he's now blaming his own staff and pointing fingers at them. Of course, it's not a messaging problem.
My automatic handgun, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol, on May the 29th from a local pawn shop.
And then there are the so-called red flag laws, which allow police to confiscate firearms from people that courts determine are dangerous in some way. The orders often come after friends or relatives report concerns about someone who owns one or more guns and, has expressed suicidal thoughts or discussed shooting people. Law enforcement can also request courts in states with red flag laws to issue one of those orders. 19 states have these risk-based gun removal laws on the books already. Again, according to the Reuters Ipsos poll, 70% of Americans support red flag laws. Now, I am not saying this is going to solve all of our problems. President Biden and Democrats in Congress are pursuing a legislative package that would include many of these proposals, but Democrats are also asking for more restrictions that make it so much less politically viable. So here's the good news. A bipartisan group of senators have reportedly reached an agreement on a framework, whatever that means, for gun legislation that looks to provide increased funding for mental health services, as well as expand background checks for gun sales and incentivize states to pass their own red flag laws. That's good news. Look, for the last week, I've been saying that the most immediate thing we can do to stop mass shootings is to be more aware of the warning signs that often precede these kinds of tragedies. We are learning tonight, for example, about more information regarding the Texas shooter. Warning signs, things he was saying on social media, things people could have done to stop him. Gun control laws are not a panacea, but it seems there's no reason not to pass sensible laws that try to keep certain weapons out of the wrong hands. I want to be clear, passing these laws won't end mass shootings. But if they make it that much harder for guns, particularly semi-automatic rifles, to get into the hands of people who could pose a serious risk to the public, our political leaders need to compromise. The president and the Democrats will not get all the legislation they want, period. And Republicans must be willing to at least try some of the most sensible proposals with regard to keeping weapons out of the wrong hands. It's what the vast majority of Americans want, even if we, aren't always the loudest voices in the room.
Have exacerbated inflationary pressures which couldn't have been foreseen 18 months ago.
Why
including, well, I'm trying to answer your question. Hold on, I was just getting to the why not. Including Russia's decision to invade Ukraine, multiple successive variants of COVID, and lockdowns in China.
Just pathetic. Now, according to Joe's own administration,
but is it counterproductive in being able to get people to have a compromise, particularly when you know this is such a politically charged issue?
I think it can be. And obviously, when Joe Biden speaks about loss, he does so from a very personal place and does so with great power and great empathy. And I think that registered with most of the people who watched his remarks tonight. But when he started talking about the policies, it's where he moved from politics being the art of the possible, potentially, to actually getting in the way of what the framework, and it's not even a framework yet with the Senate, it's more of a sketch of what a framework might be on some of these issues, including red flag laws. And potentially to gum up the policy and the politics of this. Now, if that happens, that also means that a lot of what we heard today will be rhetoric that we hear from a lot of Democrats, not just Biden, over the coming months. They would much rather talk about this and other issues or any other issue than inflation, and certainly on things like automatic weapons bans. When you look at the polling that's very popular nationally to do so, these are things that they'll be talking about in the coming months.
What it seems like, though, Dana, is the idea of the convenience of almost a pretextual reason to have an exit ramp. If you're saying, look, the reason I can't go forward now is because the way that Biden actually articulated the problem, that's my exit ramp here, and so I'm going to be obstinate in some way. On the other hand, you know that Mitch McConnell has spoken about this being an issue of mental health and about school safety, so the framing of the discussion seems to be a little bit distinct. But to underscore the point that you just raised, the House Judiciary Committee did vote down party line to approve a package of gun control. So even before President Biden spoke today, you know, there was a reason to vote along party lines. Does this bode well for any potential, even in the Senate, let alone the entire House?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as possible, it's important to separate out what the House is doing, because it is Democrats lead the House, and they can pass, even though it's the narrowest of majorities, they can pass pretty much anything regarding this issue there. It just is. It's the Senate, which is much more murky, as we've said on so many issues before. They will need a 60-vote threshold, so that means 10 Republicans, never mind Democrats like Joe Manchin, to come along with them. You know, the one thing that I will say, and it was more of a question raised, and certainly talking to Republican sources, who are involved in negotiations, they are arguing, well, thanks, Mr. President, privately, that certainly didn't help, because we are trying to get something done. And the more you push on the very, very divided and very intransigent GOP base, the way you get. The other very important part of the discussion that we're having here is this is a president who's really upset. He's the guy, he's the commander in chief, he's in charge, he's in the White House, and this is happening on his watch, and he is angry. And so it's understandable that he would go out and make this speech. It was actually more surprising to me to watch him over the past week try to be quiet and try to temper hit the expectations, because it's obviously counter to what he really believes and wants. He was trying to play kind of the political game, but clearly the word enough, he really.
But yet this seems like honestly, Doug, an easy lift for Republicans to say, hey, I'm doing something about this. It's not as if it's only Democrats who are being gunned down in violence. It's everyone, it seems. And so is there a Republicans and Democrats might find the common ground, at least of saying it just makes sense politically to do what seems to be overwhelmingly popular, to at least come to the table and look for compromise?
Well, in a limited sense, depending on what comes out of the Senate, or if anything comes out of the Senate, I think that may be true. But the reality is United States senators all represent different states, and members of Congress all represent different districts. And so if you're talking Vermont versus North Carolina versus California versus Georgia, all very different political realities in there, and then you take the congressional districts within there, members of Congress and senators really accurately reflect, believe it or not, their voters and who they hear from and who shows up on election day. And it's part of why we see, and on any issue, not just one this emotionally, that when you start with the negotiations, you're also looking for the exit ramps pretty quickly. And when that happens, you always blame the other side, regardless of who the other side is.
Thank you, Dana Bash and Doug Heye. I wish the answers were different, but I know you're both right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Grieving families we are seeing in Uvalde, they still have yet to get answers. Answers as to why police failed to follow their training to confront an active shooter. Questions like why the chief at the center of this failure won't give them answers. Could there be legal repercussions for law enforcement? Should there be repercussions? Next.
We're Carvana, the company who
Out of getting the money they claim they're owed?
Let's hope not. I mean, come on. It's ironic, isn't it, that they wrote this article, they put Amber Heard's name on it, and that's what caused her to now have to pay a $15 million judgment. I mean, the ACLU, it was a concerted effort with the ACLU and with Amber Heard to put this op-ed piece out there. And so for the ACLU to now come back and say, hey, gee, we were unfairly dragged into this litigation and we want $86,000 back. Boy, that's just not going to, I don't think that's going to carry the day with this judge at all. Well, I mean, they were
in Uvalde, and Joe Biden and the Democrats filibustered that legislation. 52 senators voted for it. 9 Democrats voted for it. We had bipartisan agreement, and the Democrats cynically said, if we can't disarm law-abiding citizens, we, the Democrats, are not willing to do anything to secure schools. Just this week, Joe Biden says he doesn't believe in hardening schools and making them safer. Well, that is cynical and it's wrong. And unfortunately, it is a set of policy proposals. What the Democrats are putting forward would not stop these horrible crimes. Instead, it's their political objective.
Why don't we start with this? Why don't we refund the police, stop dismantling the police, and why don't we keep those criminals in jail and abandon these no bail laws that let even violent criminals out without paying a penny in bail, so they're back out on the streets. By their very nature, criminals don't obey laws. And the CDC even points out, Senator, 2.5 million times a year, Americans use legal firearms to protect themselves and their families. So that would seem to me part of an argument that they don't want to talk about.
Look, that's exactly right. Even the Obama White House admitted that firearms are used defensively times, upwards of 1 million times a year. Even the Obama White House and these leftists want to take those firearms away so that people are defenseless to defend their families. They won't focus on the criminals. They won't focus on the bad guys. And I got to say, it was really frustrating being down in Uvalde, seeing what happened, because I was also on the ground at Santa Fe. The Santa Fe High School is an hour from my house. I was there within an hour or so of when that horrific shooting happened. And I remember sitting down at round tables with the families from Santa Fe, and one of the things